Well, folks, it's been a while since we've taken a look at a collection Well, folks, it's been a while since we've taken a look at a game collection disc, now hasn't it? And I thought today's episode it would be a little fun if we took a look at the king of reselling and repackaging games, Sega. Now, don't get me wrong, Sega is not the only company that is guilty of rehashing older games in order to make a quick buck, and I do like an old nostalgia bomb every now and then, but Sega seems to be taking this game collection thing and turning it into an art, releasing multiple collections of the exact same games every single console generation. It's almost like they're losing confidence in their ability to come up with original IPs, and instead are banking on people's nostalgic feelings towards their older titles on the Genesis, Master System, and even the Saturn in order to keep faith alive. Now, I am in no way trying to suggest that Sega is a less reputable game company because of this practice. It's just something that happens to be wearing thin on my nerves personally. However, today's collection that we're taking a look at is kind of special because, while many of the games on this collection did go on to be re-released on Genesis, many of them are actually arcade games rather than just plain ports from the Genesis. However, Sega decided to go the extra mile and improve these titles. You'll see why I put air quotes around improve in a little bit when we actually take a look at the game. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the Sega Classics collection. First off, let me say that the presentation here is very underwhelming. Absolutely no extras to unlock, nothing except a generic rock tune, a generic title screen, and then a list of games. So instead, we're just going to focus on the games, what was changed, and how they hold up, starting with Alien Syndrome. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this game, it was originally a sprite-based top-down shooter in which you tried to save a bunch of captives from an alien invasion, while at the same time fighting against a bomb time limit to try and make it all the way to the end of the stage and defeat the boss. Not much has changed in terms of gameplay, but as I'm sure you figured out by now, Sega decided to remake the entire game in three-dimensional graphics. The environments in the game do look pretty good, but the character models themselves look very late PlayStation 1-ish, especially when you're close up on one of the human characters, and as you can probably tell, the enemies suffer because of this, looking like you're fighting a bunch of gelatinous worms. There is more enemy variation in later stages, but they're all par for the course and they don't really look that good. The bosses also really suffer because of the new three-dimensional design, especially the first one, who's... oh my. Well, anyway, resulting awkwardness from the graphical changes aside, the only other real complaint I have about the game is that if you fail to defeat the boss before the bomb goes off, well, you have to restart from the very beginning of the game, no matter how much health or lives you have left. Other than that, it's a damn good shooter and a great example of arcade at its best. Virtual Racing. As far as I can tell, this is one of the games on the disc that they actually changed the least, aside from a few graphical tightenings, mostly because the game was already a polygonal three-dimensional racer, and it plays pretty well too. I will admit that I have some bias against the game because I'm not a big fan of arcade racers, i.e. I kinda suck at them, if you can't already tell. But I do appreciate the game for what it is, and the multiple camera angles are actually pretty fun. So, in my book, this game is okay. Though, the trees in the background really stand out when compared to the detail put into the car. Now, before we go on, I should clarify that I'm not really giving a detailed analysis of each individual game because there really isn't a need to. These are still, at their heart, arcade games, regardless of whatever changes Sega made to them. Their gameplay is usually very simple and self-explanatory, they're usually extraordinarily difficult, and the purpose of each game is pretty straightforward. They were designed primarily to be quarter suckers, after all. But with all that in mind, you still need to keep in mind that altering these games in any fashion well, you still have to have a good reason to alter them, which many of these games did not have. I'm happy to say that the next two games on the list were actually not altered that much, if at all. The Bonanza Brothers. This is probably the one that stands out the most from the rest of the collection, with the possible exception of our next game. Apart from all the other hack and slashers, the racers, and the shooters that make up the rest of the collection, this game is a stealth action game where you take control of a pair of thieves, the titular Bonanza Brothers, and steal treasures from other criminals. The idea is to try to make it to the exit with all the treasures in hand without getting caught by the guards or running out of time. Hard as crap, but it's definitely one of the most enjoyable games on the disc, and looks very similar to its original arcade port, as well as the Genesis port that came afterwards. It's also probably the longest game on the disc by far, in that it's a whole 10 stages long, though good luck getting there without getting quite a few game overs. Tantar. This is actually paired with Bonanza Brothers on the disc, and it's very easy to see why. It obviously was created by the same people and uses the same character and art design. However, its gameplay is completely different. In contrast with every other game on the disc, it's a minigame collection in the same vein as the WarioWare series that would come many years later. The basic idea is to complete all the minigames with as few mistakes as possible in order to reach the very end of the stage. You lose a life if you run out of time, but you also lose a life for every mistake that you make during those games, meaning that it's extremely unforgiving. While it is very unique, it can get extraordinarily difficult, and some of the games are so unfairly balanced in your favor that it's almost certain that you are going to lose a lot of lives on them. Still, this is by far probably the most unique game on the disc, as well as its brother game, Bonanza Bros. Space Harrier, one of Sega's most popular shooter in the arcades, and it's easy to see why. It's basically a from-behind space shooter with some science fiction and fantasy elements mixed together here and there, where you basically just fly around and shoot anything that gets in your way. Simple as that. However, the original game used bitmap sprites on a scrolling backdrop, whereas this one combines both 2D sprites and 3D models, and it really clashes with one another, to the point where it gets extremely distracting, and you can't tell what you can and cannot run into. Primarily, it's enemy projectiles that suffer the most from this change, because since they're still 2D sprites on a 3D scrolling background, it can be really hard to gauge how close they are to you, and you end up taking a whole lot of cheap hits because you can't tell which way you're supposed to dodge, or whether or not you'll be able to make it past a projectile in time before it hits you. It's really frustrating because I've never been able to get very far in this game, and this is probably the shooter on the disc that I'm actually best at. There's also a very big lack of quality in the 3D models. While they move just fine, it still doesn't look very good. I mean, it looks better than Alien Syndrome, but still, it could have been a whole lot better. And then there, of course, is, oh my god, it's a luck dragon!
A never-ending story. Never-ending story.
And now that song is stuck in your head. You can thank me later.